Hello, my dear friends. Yesterday was the 140th Yartzeit of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. He passed away in 1883 on Chafei Shvat. Yesterday was Chafei Shvat. His influence was profound as a result of his efforts and his ideology and his philosophy. He inaugurated or initiated the Musar movement, which continues even unto this day. Oftentimes people start movements and they become very popular at the time. The Musar movement today is probably even more popular than it was 140 years ago, because when Yisrael promoted the study of Musar, there was tremendous opposition, and many of the yeshivas and many of the Gdolim thought that it was a wrong approach, but Yisrael prevailed, and he had Talmidim, he had disciples, and Talmidim, and the disciples of disciples, and we are all influenced by this chain of disciples of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter in our way of thinking about ourselves and the world, the way of studying Torah. I would suggest that the influence of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter extends even far and beyond the Jewish world, because of our interaction, the interaction between the Jews and the non-Jewish world, areas to which we are very sensitive, it rubs off on others. And Rabbi Yisrael emphasized sensitivity to others, and I think that there's a heightened awareness of sensitivity in the world today. It may be that the world, in many ways, there's so many things that are wrong and are messed up, but there is definitely heightened sensitivity to the needs of the individual. And to me, it seems that could be traced back in many ways to Yisrael Salanter. They say that in the secular world, the three greatest thinkers who had the most profound impact on society in the last 200 years were Karl Marx, the father of socialism and communism, Albert Einstein, who revolutionized the world of science with the theory of relativity, and Sigmund Freud, who was the father of modern psychology. Strikingly, all three were Jews. But the one that's missing from that list is Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and I would say that his impact was more important and more powerful than that of the other three, because Rabbi Yisrael changed our own sensitivity to the way we deal with the way we live our own lives and the way we deal with our fellow man. It's very hard to encapsulate, especially in a few minutes, what Rabbi Yisrael Salanter stood for. He was a pioneer. He was innovative. He was creative. He had a sense of responsibility for the entire Jewish world. He was not afraid to start to promote different types of approaches. Everything was rooted in Torah. It wasn't an ideology, that it wasn't a reformation, it wasn't a change, but it was a heightened focus on different aspects of Torah thought. Everything that Yisrael Salanter talks about, you can find it's in the Chazal, but it was an emphasis that he had. And in honor of his Yartzeit, I would highlight just two aspects of Yisrael Salanter's approach and the effect that it had on Jewry and on the Musar movement that developed as a result. And that is, number one, Bein Adam L'Chaveiro. What's the role in Torah? There's Bein Adam L'Makom and Bein Adam L'Chaveiro. The mitzvahs are divided in half. Half of the mitzvahs are between man and God. Half of the mitzvahs between man and fellow man. In the Aseret Dibros, the first 5 are Bein Adam L'Makom, the second 5 are Bein Adam L'Chaveiro. What's the relationship between those two? So the answer is, and this was always the case, but Rabbi Yisrael highlighted it, is that if a person is not Shomer Shabbos, so if he doesn't keep Shabbos, so you can't say that he's a Torah Jew, because that's core. If a person doesn't, there are 613 mitzvahs. If a person is missing out on what this mitzvah, that mitzvah, he's still an observant Jew. But if he's not Torah Shomer Shabbos, he can't call him a a Torah observant Jew. He may be a super fine person, and we have to treat the person with respect, and he may have some very profound religious feelings. But when we talk about a Torah Jew, it's somebody that observes the Torah, and Shabbos is core. But you'll say, well, Shabbos is core, but let's say somebody who talks Lashon Hara, or somebody who's hurtful, or somebody who's humiliates other people, or abusive. You would think that, but if he keeps Shabbos, he's still a Shabbos Jew. Yisrael Salanter thought, no, that's not true. If a person is insensitive to others, he's not a Torah Jew. The two halves of the luchos were one. It was one tablet. They were connected. The two tablets were connected to each other, and you can't have one tablet without the other tablet. And a person who's deficient in one area, you can't in the area ben adam l'chavero. He's not a Torah Jew. Somebody who's insensitive to others, and he's hurtful, and he causes them pain. So it doesn't matter that he eats glatt kosher, and he has mezuzahs that are this big, and he shuckles during Shemona Esrei, and he learns 16 hours a day. But if he's insensitive to other people and he's hurtful, then he's not a Torah Jew. And that was something that Rabbi Yisrael emphasized over and over again in his thinking. One of his disciples, Rav Simcha Zissel, the author of Kelm, said, in the name of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, that if a posek is deficient in midos, and midos primarily has to do with the way we relate to others. A person who's deficient in midos, his Torah, listen to this, his Torah is not considered Torah. And if he paskins a halacha, it's not a psak halacha. Because if he's not an authentic Torah Jew, then he can't, his Torah is not authentic, and his psak halacha has no validity. Because that's not the package. That's not what a Torah Jew is. I gave an example once, that if a person has a car, so if you're missing a mirror, it's still a car. Or if the seats are torn, it's still a car. But if you have a car with no engine, you could sit in the car all day, you could turn the steering wheel, and you could think that you're going all over the place, but it's not a car. A car without an engine is not a car. A person whose midos are deficient is not a Torah Jew. That's core to the individual. There's so many magnificent stories about Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, which highlight, and we only know a little bit about his life. He didn't tell over these stories. There are a few of the stories that people observed, and they were able to share, to preserve, that we were able to know about those stories. A few that come to mind, just legally nishmaso on his Yartzeit. One time they were waiting for him for Kol Nidre, and where's the Rabbi? He didn't show up. He didn't come to shul, and they're waiting. And finally they went out to look for him. Where is he? And they found that he was in a little hut someplace in the village with a baby. What was he doing there? They asked him. So he said that he was walking to shul to say Kol Nidre, and he heard the baby crying. The mother apparently had left the baby. She wanted to hear Kol Nidre, spiritually inspiring. She wanted to be in shul for Kol Nidre. She figured the baby will manage. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, his sense of priorities was much more important than Kol Nidre is to make sure that the baby is taken care of. What an amazing story. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter used to say, when they baked matzahs, so for Pesach, so they needed to hire extra people to bake the matzahs, because it was the whole year they didn't need so many matzahs. So where would they find people who didn't have jobs? So they would hire children who were yisomim, orphans, and almanos, widows, and they would be willing, in order to earn a meager income. They were the ones that were working, and they would often work 14, 15 hours a day. And when you bake matzahs, you have to do everything fast, because if you're not fast, then the dough rises and it becomes chametz. So the people who were overseeing the baking would encourage everybody. They would mizares them to hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. So they asked Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, what makes a matzah the most muhudar? What's the most significant chumras that you have to have when you want to bake matzahs? Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said, you want to know what the biggest chumrah is? Don't yell and don't pressure the Yisayimim and the Almanas, the widows and the orphans. That's the biggest heater. He said, what do you mean? But the matzah, if they don't rush, it'll be chamed. That's more important, that you don't pressure the Yisayimim and the Almanas. There's the famous story, I've told it 100 times. Yisrael Salanter was invited to somebody's house, a very wealthy person who was a Talmud of his, and he told him, I want so much to have the Rebbe. My house is glad kosher, and we have a beautiful Shabbos table, and the Rebbe should come for Shabbos, and we have Zmiros, and we have Divrei Torah. It's a magnificent experience. Please come to our house for Shabbos. So Yisrael Salanter said, okay, on one condition: no Divrei Torah and no Zmiros. So the person got what the Rebbe doesn't want to have Zmiros and Divrei Torah, but had no choice. That's what the Rebbe's condition was. So he came to his house for Shabbos, no Zmiros and no Divrei Torah. Person, the whole meal, he couldn't understand. The meal ended in a half hour. So at the end of the meal, he said, the Rishol said, I would like to see the person who cooked the meals. So in the kitchen, there was an almana, a widow, who was the one that was cooking the meals. So they brought her to the table to see Rabbi Salanter. So he says, Madam, I want to ask Mechila from you because I rushed the meal so much. So she said, are you kidding? You want to ask Mechila? Usually I get home 1, 2, and 3 in the morning, Shabbos night, because there's so many Divrei Torah and Zmiros. Thank you so much, Rebbe, because you rushed the meal. I could go home at a reasonable hour. That was the genius and the greatness of Yisrael Salanter, that the sense of perspective for the individual. In this week's parsha, first I would preface by saying that because we are attuned to this way of thinking because of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, so when we study Torah, we see the things that we focus on oftentimes have to do with midos and bein adam l'chavero. So in this week's parsha, there is the Eved Ivri. Person buys a slave, and the slave works for 7 years. So the Torah says that the Gemara says that when you buy a slave, you're buying a master for yourself, because the slave has to be treated better than the master. How so? Because it says in Yishalmi, the Chumash says that the slave, or the Gemara says that the slave, whatever the master has, the slave has to have the same thing. If the master has a pill, the slave also has to have a pill. If the master eats steak for supper, the Eved also has to eat steak. So the Yishalmi says that, let's say there's only one pillow. Let's say there's only one steak. Who gets it? So the Yishalmi says the slave has to get it, because otherwise the slave has to be equal to the master. If the master is going to get it, then the slave's not equal. So the slave gets it. So many of the Bali Musar, many of the people who focus on Musar, who are the disciples of Yisrael Salanter, they ask the question, what does that make any sense? Why should the person who is the master, why should he? Okay, if even that's difficult to understand. Why, if there's 2 pillows, why the slave has to get a pillow too? But when there's only one pillow, why should the slave have to get a pillow? So they say because the slave has to be treated with respect. The purpose of being a slave it's not punitive. It's for the benefit of the slave. And what does in the prison system, they talk a lot about the prisons and the bail reform, and it's a broken system. The rate of what they call recidivism, what's the rate at which people who are incarcerated return to a life of crime? It's astounding. Within the first year, it's like 40%, 50%, depending on the state. Within the 10 years, it's close to 90%. So prisoners and the American penal system, probably around the world as well, they're not rehabilitated. So there's efforts to rehabilitate by teaching them a profession and things like that, and giving them instruction and psychological assistance. But it's done. It's not very effective. So the Torah has a better way, a better system. It's too bad that the people who are running the prison systems don't study this, the thinking of the Bali Musar, who were the Talmidim of Yisrael Salanter. And that is the most important thing to do, to rehabilitate a person. The person became a slave because he stole. So he in order to pay back his debt, he was sold in slavery. What's the most important thing? It's to restore his sense of dignity, that he should feel important. And if the slave is going to feel second fiddle to his master, even though, why shouldn't he? He's a slave. He's the Nebuch. He's the Rachmanis case. But if you're going to treat him that way, then he'll always be a slave, and he'll always be a ganav, and he'll finish the 7 years, and he'll go back to a life of crime. So therefore the Torah says, you have to give the slave the best that there is, and if you can't give it To both, the slave comes first because you want to restore his sense of dignity. The importance of treating a person with respect, and that heightened sensitivity, that comes from Yisrael Salanter. One last thing I would say is Yisrael Salanter is focused on changing our own midas, our own character, and that not to think about what's wrong with him, but to think about what's wrong with me. Not to say, society's no good and all sorts of problems. Don't worry about society. Worry about yourself. If you change, that will change the society. So Yisrael was a great person. I could talk about it for a few hours, but my time is up. Self-imposed time. I already went too long. So I wish everyone a good Shabbos, and we should all be inspired by the example of Yisrael Salanter. There's so many books written about them. I would encourage you to purchase biographies of Yisrael Salanter, because he had, out of all the great thinkers in the world, I think that he was the one that had the greatest impact in the last 200 years. Have a wonderful, good Shabbos.